Hello and welcome to another edition of the ATACS podcast. This is episode 54, March 3rd, 2019. This episode brought to you by Teddy Pendergrass's Love TKO. Inside jokes. Joining us today, I'm your host Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have with me Will from Greenville, North Carolina. How's it going, Mr. Will?
It's deep.
Will's got that deep, sick voice. Also joining me, Ryan from New York.
I think I'd better let it go.
Oh, boy.
Sad news on the podcast today. We learned that Teddy Pendergrass died 9 years ago.
Yeah. Pour one out.
You know, pour one out for Teddy.
Mm-hmm. So to honor Teddy, we're going to talk about video games.
Just like he would have wanted.
Exactly. And who better to talk about video games than deep voice Will?
Goodness. Well, you're going to turn it to me?
That soothing voice.
That's where it is. That's where it is. Now Teddy, back in 2010, it's funny that I'm playing a game that, the game I spent the most time on the last 2 weeks is a game that came out in 2012. So Teddy just missed it, But this was Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning. I had some special requests to talk about this gem of a game. And so I'm going to bring you this info, hot off the presses, hot take of this game from 2012. So I think what had happened, because I feel like I need to explain myself.
Yeah, so the Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning has a weird backstory anyway, but the fact that you're playing it in 2019, I feel like deserves its own backstory.
Right. So I'll try and provide. Go ahead,
yeah,
Ryan. What was up?
I was just going to say, part of the reason I'm curious about this is, it has its own backstory, but I get the sense that it's like a decent ARPG. It just kind of is like there.
Yeah. Well.
So yeah, let's hear it. Story time.
So I don't know if you guys were here for the podcast a couple weeks ago, but Ryan made a very good argument. I think Steph was on the podcast and she was like, so, Will, how do you find all these games? How do you find all these good games? And Ryan chimed in with a quick, well, he probably kisses a lot of frogs, meaning I probably play a lot of games that don't really nail it for me, to dig out these so-called gems. And so I think sometimes if I've been playing too many games like that, I've been playing too many things that just don't resonate with me. I typically try and limit my single-player gaming to things that I feel like wouldn't work in co-op. So a lot of times I'll play stealth games or very, very story-heavy games. But at some point I just decided, I was like, well, why don't I just make a list of things that are very, very engaging to me? So I made like a list, and that included things like, top-down shooters like Hotline Miami or action RPGs, sometimes third-person open-world games if they're done well. And so when I was looking back at some of the things that I could play that might fit this bill, Kingdoms of Amalur was like one of the things that popped up. And I was like, well, I never played that. All I know about it is that supposedly it's very long. There was some criticism about it being almost like a single-player MMO. And I found it for $3. So I said, okay, nice. So let's see what this is. And so I started it, and it definitely looks and feels a bit dated. I can't lie. I guess it was one of these things where the things I guess that I stand out about it. So you've got these sort of skills. They're about like, or I guess you might call them like more of like your abilities. And those include things like alchemy and persuasion and blacksmithing and lockpicking and all that stuff. There are maybe like 11 of those or 12 of those. And then of course you've got 3 skill trees. There's like a might skill tree, a finesse skill tree, and a sorcery skill tree. And one of the things I had been reading is that 1, Kingdoms of Amalur is very easy, and 2, you can quote unquote be anything. And so I found that was kind of marginally true, so I focused on a couple of these skills like lockpicking and dispelling and things like that, and ignored things like blacksmithing and alchemy and things that I just felt would be very time consuming and like would involve a lot of like reagent and ingredient fetching. And so I sort of just ignored those parts of the game and went forward. And it was sort of enjoyable. I think the two biggest issues that I had with it, I'd say one of them is actually with the skill trees, which and maybe this is very much like an MMO. I don't know. I don't play a lot of MMOs, but I found that like to get myself engaged in it, I like looked at the skill trees to begin with, and I was like, well, how do I want to do? What kind of guy do I want to make? And so I wrote down all the skills I wanted to use. And then when I actually started playing the game, I found that I couldn't actually go the way I wanted to go because there were certain skills that wouldn't unlock until you had a certain number of total skills in the tree. So basically it forces you to take random skills that you're probably not interested in to actually get up to the higher levels of that tree. And every time I had to do that, it just felt really, really bad to me. And then of course so I was kind of wanting to sort of dual class it, like take a couple skills from finesse and take a couple skills from sorcery. But then like the one skill that I wanted from sorcery required that I already have 20 points in the sorcery tree. And so at that point I was like, well, okay, so what I can actually do here is pretty limited. So most of what I did while I played is, went around looking for like the skill books. And this game in a lot of ways does kind of remind me of like some sort of streamlined third person Oblivion in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You've got skill books and you've got skill trainers, and then you've got these different factions. There's like the Fae, and there's sort of like a fighters guild, and there's sort of like a thieves guild analog called the Travelers. The most interesting to me were probably the Fae, which are they're sort of like almost like these creatures from sort of a different plane, and they live alongside you, but they're functionally immortal. There's some sort of stream, and whenever they die, they go back in the stream, and then they emerge out of the stream. And then while they're alive, they basically actually do a certain story. So for instance, there might be a story where this guy goes and saves this woman's life, and then he gets killed by a troll. And basically all he does is do that story. Like the story will play out exactly as it happened in, I guess who knows when it actually first happened, but it'll play out the same way, and then he'll die, and then he'll fall into that stream and be reborn, and then play through that same story, kind of ad infinitum. And it's interesting because, of course, they have this sort of derision towards like what they call, I guess, traditional mortals, because we apparently are very, very short-sighted and greedy. And then, of course, we kind of feel that they're kind of weird because they're just kind of playing through these same stories over and over and over again. And that's kind of what each of their quote-unquote lives consists of. But I thought it was, I guess, pretty interesting just because, just from a historical sense, a lot of conflicts do kind of repeat in that way. There might be a particular power struggle, and if you, at least politically, and then maybe you look back 50 years and there was a very similar power struggle, politically. And not to say that, quote unquote, there's nothing new under the sun, but, and I also like the idea that, stories serve as a lot of times motivational grist for our meal, so, we can read stories that will inspire us or give us some insight or help us to be more understanding or empathetic. And so I found their faction to be very interesting because they're all kind of parts of these different stories, and they consider themselves kind of like the guardians of these stories, and there's certain power in the stories too. So there's one woman that you find who's like, hey, there's this Fae story I heard where this maiden gets killed by a troll and she's got a really expensive ring on. And so basically you can sort of recreate this story and then take the ring from the maiden and then just kind of have it to live, like however you want to live, whatever you want to do. And so that I thought was really kind of clever. And I guess you would assume that, I think this whole world was put together by some fantasy author. I think it's like R.A.
Salvatore.
Yeah, yeah. And so I guess, you would expect that there to be some depth to some of the storytelling pieces. But so basically what I did was just I found all the trainers, I found all the skill books, and then I did the whole Fae storyline, and then I did all the main quests. And then there's probably I'm probably done with the game, and I probably put like 24 hours into it. And I think that you could probably put like 140 hours into it from what I understand.
You said 24 hours. I was like, wow, that's how I should have played that game, because I think so. I played this game when it came out, and I'm pretty sure I put 50, 60 hours into my playthrough, and I remember about halfway through just feeling totally burnt out on it.
Right.
From there, it was just a repetitive slog, and it was like, man, I should have totally just critical pathed this game.
And after I got done, I did look online, and I was like, are there any like quests that you should definitely play? And they talked about this one quest that was part of this area called Webwood, where there was some sort of like spider queen lady, and so I played that little quest line. But it's so overwhelming with the number of quests in the game. Like, I think when I was about a third of the way through my playthrough, I looked at my quest log, and I had like, 21 quests in it. And then, from the rest of the game, I ignored most of the quests. But I would say I saw a new quest giver probably every 2 or 3 minutes,
Yeah.
and I mean, and a lot of them just have a quest. There's not a lot in this game unless you're doing the faction quest line of like one guy giving you a huge line of them.
Yeah.
But there's just so many, and it's kind of overwhelming just to kind of figure out, what's worth doing.
Yeah, that's one of my main memories of this game, is there just being so many quests, and so many of the side quests are what you think of as filler style MMO quests of like,
right,
go kill X number of these things, go get this item and bring it back to me, and like just very not interesting stuff. So you were probably wise to skip most of this.
So this is like a single player ARPG? Because I always thought it was like, more like a Torchlight or a Diablo that you would play.
Oh,
no, it's single player.
I think it is single player. Yeah.
I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah. Sorry about the cough. Our world listeners, but yeah, I wouldn't say I loved it. I mean, I appreciated some of the writing and the lore in it, but I think, and I guess it was moderately engaging, like planning a skill tree and then sort of watching your kind of build come together. But if there's one thing about me that I guess you could say the ATACS listeners need to know, is that in a game like that, it's very important for me to feel like I can create something that kind of, expresses myself. And I guess I can't say that in a way that doesn't sound ridiculous, but it just kind of is what it is. Like, I like to feel like I'm creating something that is uniquely mine. And so there are certain things that can kind of sabotage that. One of them is something like, I actually feel like I'm in the very, very minority of people who don't like the ability to be able to switch skills on the fly for no cost. A lot of times in a game like this, I like to sort of just create a build. And then, I mean, not that you aren't able to ever refund skill points or redistribute them.
Yeah, I feel like I respect
a cost.
Are you allowed to respect?
Oh yeah. No, but basically what I'm saying is, I guess I'm making a very roundabout way of making this point. But I guess in Kingdoms of Amalur, the fact that I had to put in a certain number of points before the next skill, or a number of points in the tree in general before I was able to actually access the next skill that I wanted to take, led me to feel like probably, it would be very, very easy to kind of just sort of stumble into, whatever. I guess the build felt less like mine because I kept having to put points in skills that I didn't want.
Is that really unusual though? Because if you're thinking of like a Grim Dawn, I mean, you can't get to the end of like the Inquisitor tree unless you put a bunch of points in the other stuff, right?
Well,
there's definitely skills.
Yeah, so there's a mastery in Grim Dawn where it's like you have to have a certain number of points in the mastery to unlock all the skills. And there are certainly times like you're true. Like, for instance, let's say there's a skill at the very end of a line of 3 skills, and you have to put 1 point in the skill before that and 1 point in the skill before that before you get to the last one. But in this one, I mean, there were times where I was maxing out skills that I had no interest in. I had to put in I was putting 5 points into a skill that I didn't care about just to hit the next tier so I could actually get the one I wanted. Okay. And it just didn't feel good to me. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's probably not a big thing,
If I remember, I mean, I played this when it came out, so
7 years ago.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, I tried to do some weird, because there are the 3 trees. It's basically warrior, rogue, mage.
Right.
And I feel like I tried to do some warrior mage hybrid, like a battle mage type thing. Mm-hmm. And I remember I respec'd at some point to just full mage.
Yeah, the game doesn't support dual classing very well at all.
Yeah, and that's what I was about to say, is I feel like the most efficient way to play that game is to just pick one tree, just put all your points into that tree.
Right. Yeah, and I ended up doing that. I wanted to do a rogue sorcerer hybrid, and then I ended up going full rogue.
Yeah.
And so, I guess I felt like
almost anyone's full rogues are going to look basically the same.
Right, because you're basically, you're kind of you got a set number of skills, and you got to get up to 50 points to get the highest ones. And so you're just throwing points in all kinds of stuff by the end.
Yeah.
But it was fine. I mean, it was engaging, and I don't necessarily say I hated my time with it. I got to hear some interesting stories. It's not definitely nowhere near among my favorite of the ARPG kind of genre.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting thing to experience.
Yeah. And it's interesting that 7 years later, it's that my memory lines up, sounds like similarly to yours. It's it's not necessarily a bad game, but it's not doing anything outstanding either. It's kind of a very straightforward one of those games.
Yeah.
It's interesting that 7 years later, it's kind of it seems like you have a similar reaction.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously there are a lot of ARPGs that could probably benefit from having I guess what you might call an actual professional author creating their worlds. You know, so I think that's a cool thing.
When this game came out, it was actually pitched as kind of a dream team of sorts, because it had R.A. Salvatore doing all the lore and writing, Todd McFarlane doing the artwork, and Grant Kirkhope doing the music.
Okay.
Who are all pretty big names within their realms.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I played it so far after the fact that I can't say the art really did anything for me.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the music, and the music probably wasn't bad. It might not be my style. You know, but it was, it's very fantasy music, I mean, whatever you think of when you think of fantasy music, that's kind of the one. But anyway, that was Kingdoms of Amalur. Probably talked longer about that than anyone wanted me to, but
it's all good. And for anyone who doesn't know all of the drama around that game, we shouldn't get into it here, but just go read the stories of what happened with that game's development. It's kind of fascinating.
Is there a chapter in the book that you read about that, or
no? I wish there was. The book I read was more recent games than that,
right?
For the most part, there were a couple older Halo Wars, but that would have been. I feel like the story of that one was so publicized that it probably didn't need special reporting on, because it was all in the news. It was.
Gotcha.
This game was funded by the state of Rhode Island.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was headed up by retired baseball player Curt Schilling. And then,
nice.
And he got the state of Rhode Island to fund the development of this game, to bring development jobs to Rhode Island. And then the game bombed within 3 months of it coming out. Everyone was laid off. The company was shut down. People were getting sued, and Curt Schilling's life savings were gone. It was complete disaster.
Wow.
I remember hearing some story of celebrity involvement, but I didn't realize it was and obviously I didn't remember the game being particularly successful, even though it's been kind of around, but I didn't realize it was that level.
Yeah, no, it was there was all this news made of all these people coming together to make this game, and all this hype beforehand, and then immediately after it came out, it was it's bombed, shut it down, everyone's out of money, and it was the original goal was to make an MMO, and this game was made to help fund the MMO, this single player game. And this did so bad that like all plans were immediately canceled. It's a wild story.
Yikes.
That's worth reading sometime if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah. And I remember bits and pieces of what you're saying, but I certainly don't have a coherent narrative in my head as to what happened with this game. So that might be something to look up.
Yeah.
So the other kind of special request I had was a game called the Dresden Files cooperative card game. And this is something I've kind of had my eye on for a while. I think it was a 2017 release, maybe. But basically, it's not so much a deck builder, which a lot of the card games that I end up playing are kind of deck builders. But I guess there are these different scenarios that you can kind of play through in the game. And there are also a number of characters. Each character kind of has their own deck that you're kind of drawing from. And the way that I've been playing it, I mean, I technically, I'm sure you could have 4 players, but the way I've been playing it, which is 2, is that each player controls 2 different characters. So the cards that you have access to are sort of a random mixture of those 2 characters. Or I think maybe half from one of the characters that you have and half from the other one. And then the scenarios or the books that you pick to play through are super duper theme heavy. So, I mean, the one thing that's great about it is that there's just a lot of strategy and a lot of thinking involved. So not only do you have the main types of cards that are on the board there are cases to be solved, there are enemies to be defeated, there are obstacles to quote unquote overcome, and then there are advantages to, I guess, quote unquote take. And you have different cards that will either, deal damage to enemies, put clues on cases, and a certain number of clues will solve the case, just like a certain number of damage will kill the enemy. The obstacles, you can overcome them as long as you have a card that can reach them. So there's actually a range aspect to the game. And then you can take advantages as long as you can reach them as well. So as long as your take advantage card has enough range. But typically, there are a lot of other things that you do too. The biggest, I guess, tricky aspect of the game is that every card that you use, you also have what they call fate. And that kind of serves as your mana. And you have your difficulty in the game basically just is how much mana you start with or how much fate you start with. And each card costs a certain amount of fate to cast. But also, every card that you, to get more fate, you can discard a card to get that cost in fate. And so it kind of involves this sort of balancing where you're trying to sort of discard some of your cards, the ones that'll get you a lot of fate that maybe aren't as useful for you at the time. The way you win the game is to kill more enemies or basically solve more cases than there are enemies in the game. So I think you could also win by solving all cases or killing all the enemies, but usually it's some sort of mixture of the two. Like maybe you'll solve 3 cases and there'll be 2 enemies left or something. But there's a lot of like min-maxing that you're doing, and it can be helpful to kind of like have a partner there to kind of help you go through and think about what you have access to and what you can do. And of course, some of the cards have beneficial effects. Like maybe there's a card where it's like, add 3 clues to this case. And if you solve this case, add 3 clues to another case. So trying to time those little pieces out can really help you tactically, I guess, to get the most out of the cards you have. The other aspect of it is that each of the characters has like a one-time use ability that's generally pretty powerful. And they also have a discard ability. So whenever you discard a card for fate, especially if you're playing 2 players, whenever you discard a card for fate, you can choose which ability you want to use. So do I want to use one of my character's abilities or the other one? And some of those will just kind of add additional clues to cases or maybe add additional hits to enemies or move cards around or something like that. So I kind of love this game. And so I've been really playing it. My friend Luke and I have been playing it. And we usually do one match of it just about every time we get online to play games. The only thing that I think is kind of rough is that there's obviously a lot of lore here. So every book or every scenario that you get, like the obstacles will be named something specific that has to do with whatever that story is. Because I think this is based on a series of novels, like the Dresden Files novels.
Yeah, I've read the first book. I was kind of curious.
Right. And so some of your obstacles are going to be like obstacles that are actually in the book. Some of the advantages might be things that Harry does to sort of improve his situation or improve how effective he's going to be at dealing with what he's facing. The enemies are actually the enemies from the game, and the cases are actually like kind of the things he's trying to figure out in the book or whatever. And so the tough thing for me as someone who hasn't read these books is that there's not a lot of clues. Like if you haven't read these books, I mean, the game is still functional and it's still fun, but like I feel like there are a lot of pieces of it that like I can't really wrap my mind around. So, I might go and start playing a map or playing one of the scenarios, and there'll be an enemy called like Ortega's Demon. And then there'll be a case called like, was it really Ortega? And so I can tell that there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the game or in the story. But because I've never read any of these books, I've got no clue about any of this stuff. And there's also some interesting like sound design. So like, I think we were playing this one map where it seemed like we were fighting demons in the middle of a city. And so there's these ambient noises that are playing in the background the whole time you're playing that scenario. And it's like people running and screaming and like, demon noises. And we're like, man, there's a lot going on here. But we don't really know like what the deal is. So I think if you like tactics and sort of strategizing and you have a co-op partner to play it with, it's a fun thing. There are a bunch of like DLCs for it that I'm actually pretty tempted to get that add additional characters. And so that means that you could take on each scenario with maybe, because I think in the base game there's only 5 characters. So there's always going to be one that's sitting out. So, and that gives you a decent number of combinations, in terms of if you and your buddy wanted to play a scenario with every possible combination, maybe you play with 2 characters and 2 different characters or whatever. But the DLC gives you different, I guess, books or different scenarios, as well as different characters who have, different discard abilities or different one-time use abilities and a different deck. And of course the cards are pretty, kind of go into that deck. So I think Harry's got a card called like the Blue Beetle or something, which is like, I think what he drives around. It's like his it's like his Batmobile. And so I think
goofy like Volkswagen or whatever.
Right. So the Blue Beetle, his card that I think he has to like remove obstacles or whatever is called the Blue Beetle. And then of course there's one pair of werewolves that serve as a character. And some of their cards are like Pack Hunt and stuff like that. And so it's really like got a lot of cool thematic pieces to it. I guess I just wish that like every time you picked a scenario, there would be an option to like look at like a little summary or like plot of like what was happening here. So you can kind of get, because it seems like a lot of work was done to make the different scenarios reflect what was happening in the books and to make the decks reflect like what actually the characters do and what their strengths are. And so I guess I feel like all that work was kind of lost on myself and my co-op partner just because we hadn't really read these books. So, but it's a neat thing. But I don't know if you have any specific questions on it, Ron.
No, I mean, that's kind of like, I was curious, I had kind of, because my brother suggested the books to me, and I read the first one, and I thought it was kind of fun. I didn't think I wanted to go into it, like it's a bit cheesy in a way, but it's kind of neat because Harry Dresden is like, they've basically written like almost like a pseudo noir, like sort of I don't know if noir is the right, but he's like one of those gritty like classic detectives, but at the same time he's also like a practicing mage in Chicago, and he's like public about it. So a lot of the story, like even from the very beginning, like people like kind of make fun of him or like they're like, are you serious? Or like, what are you, like a psychic? And then like he's kind of this like like kind of, I don't know if grizzled is the right word. Like, he's just kind of like this classic, like, detective type. And I mean, he's not like totally like, like a grizzled villain or whatever. He's kind of a goofy character in a way, but it is
yeah, it's like noir fantasy or something like that.
It is kind of funny, yeah, to see them like juxtapose, like, you know, he's like trying to solve a case, so he's like at like this family's house. You know, he's working as a PI, like this wife has like contracted him to like, you know, see what's going on with her husband, and she thinks magic is involved, so he's like scoping out this like ritzy, you know, neighborhood, and like he's looking at pizza boxes, and then he like starts talking to a fairy because I guess, you know, it's like a mage. So they just do some funny things like.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a ham sandwich.
yeah, but yeah, it ended up. I decided not to go forward with it, but it was kind of funny.
Yeah.
So
well, I can't say anything about the quality of the stories themselves, but I can say that the game is good. So.
Well, it's kind of cool that it uses that theme and lore, and it like borrows and it's fun co-op. Like those are kind of the things I was really specifically curious about.
Right. Well, but I can leave it there, fellas.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Glad you like that one.
Yeah.
On the wish list for playing with my brother.
Oh yeah,
with the base game or whatever.
And I think we'll turn it over to you, Mr. Ryan. What good stuff you've been getting into?
I guess the main things for me to talk about are continuing, following up from the previous episode. I had talked a little bit about starting The Witcher 3 and starting Slay the Spire. So I'll maybe give an update on those games. Those are the kind of the new things I've been working on that I didn't have a whole lot to say on last episode. Starting with Slay the Spire. So I have, you know, last episode, I think I was like maybe 2 hours in or whatever, like one run, part of a run or a run in. And like, so I have gone through the game and kind of like slew the Spire, as it were, a few times. And yeah, I guess it's interesting. Like, I hit a bit of a difficulty spike because, and I get the sense this wasn't where the game was in early access, but like there are almost like two modes to the game. So you end up reaching floor 51, I think. And that's kind of like the, you know, I guess potential gameplay spoilers for anyone who is concerned about it. But so when you play Slay the Spire, you know, it's a deck builder and you choose a class, and like we talked about this on the last episode, and like you kind of build out your deck, and they have card synergies, and you know, you can sometimes remove cards from your deck, like kind of a classic deck builder game. But you know, your goal is to kind of reach the top of the spire with these different classes. And so you reach floor 51, and that was pretty fun, like playing through each of the three different classes and reaching floor 51. And then your run kind of ends there. And, you know, the game felt pretty balanced for each of the classes. But then I sort of hit this difficulty spike because once you do that with each of the classes, it kind of unlocks this final boss mode, where you can, as you're going through a regular run, you can kind of get these like pieces of a key. And then when you get to floor 51, it unlocks this small segment where you fight two bosses. And so after kind of beating the game, I kind of rolled back into it, and, you know, I don't think it spells it out for you, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, when you get to floor 51, it's pretty clear. Like in a normal run, it's like, you know, it's like victory with a question mark. Like
yeah,
the game
they're very coy about it.
Yeah, so you're like, yeah, this is sort of an anticlimactic ending. Like I suspect there's something else here. And they kind of, each time, you finish the run with a character, it shows like a key, like slotting into this door. So it's like, okay, yeah, I probably need to beat the game with each character. And then sure enough, when you do that, like it unlocks this sort of final boss challenge. So I started doing that, and I have finished that boss with a couple of the characters. Like I've played it enough, but I hit a bit of a slump. I don't know exactly the right word for it, but I found myself getting a bit frustrated because that is a pretty significant difficulty bump that just kind of hits. And
so I'm guessing that final boss is pretty tough.
Yeah, he's like a bit insane. Like he kind of starts out with a 1-2 punch of like a big debuff and then like swinging at you for like 70 damage or whatever, which, if you just have like a weak defensive hand on that second round, you just pretty much die.
Yeah, I've played a good amount of the game, and 70 damage is a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like I've been playing it a bit more and I guess learning it a bit more and, figuring it out and getting a better feel for how to make that more consistent. But that did kind of put me off a little bit because, for me, like, I like a fair amount of randomness. Like I think it generates kind of these interesting situations, and you have some tough losses or like some surprising victories, and like, but at the same time, like, and you're also rewarded for kind of learning the systems and like learning like some strategies and like constantly adapting. So I like that, but at the same time, like when there's a bit of a difficulty imbalance, it can definitely feel like you're just kind of rolling dice and like everything kind of has to click for you to be able to succeed. So, I think I'm learning a few things that have helped me, but yeah, still, it is definitely a bummer to get to the end of a 2-hour run, like with a decent deck and like, just have like a bad turn 1 or turn 2 hand and just get floored by this like final boss. Like there's definitely some feel bad in that. But overall, it's a fun game to play. Like it's kind of neat the way that these different relics and cards and like some of these events can kind of like build your deck. That part of the game is a lot of fun. It's just I think this difficulty of Spike, especially the first few times I played it, was just like kind of off-putting for me. But what were you gonna ask, Flex?
Oh, I was just gonna say I agree with that, and that actually mirrors a lot of my experience. I played the game in early access before they added the fourth act or the fourth. Yeah, I guess they're called acts. I don't know, the thing that adds the final boss.
Right.
And then I repicked it up when the full version came out and played through all 3 classes again. And like that process I actually really enjoy because like you said, I think the process of building the deck is fun, and there are different things that change it up every time you play, like the relics and different events and that kind of stuff. And I feel like the way the difficulty was such that like, I think by a lot of quote unquote roguelike standards, it's maybe not all that punishing of a game. So maybe that just helps it. But I felt like as long as I was making generally smart decisions, like I wasn't really going to get all that screwed over.
Yeah. Unless something just kind of works out badly, or like you choose an elite encounter and like it turns out to be like a bad matchup, or you get a weak hand. Yeah. I agree with that.
Yeah. And I think they've even balanced it more than when I played it in early access. Like I mostly jumped back into it after it came out to see like, oh, what has changed? And honestly, not much seems to have changed other than it seems maybe a little more balanced. And then obviously they've added the fourth act, which they possibly even added that at some point in early access just after I played it. But yeah, so then I went through and beat the game with all 3 of the classes again and got all 3 of the keys from doing that. and had a generally good time doing that. And then I started trying to do a run to the fourth act, and just like immediately was like, I'm not enjoying this at all. And it was a lot of what you said of, it felt like it just magnifies because there is a lot of randomness to it, not only in like, oh, what events do you happen to get? What relics do you happen to get? What card drops do you happen to get? Like that kind of stuff. Yep. But also, like you said, just like if you get a bad opening hand in some fights, like that's going to hurt a lot.
Yeah. You might end up limping or just dead.
Yeah. So I had a couple runs where, I'd put in a good amount of time, and then bad hand, bad elite encounter, like just bad something, like cripple me, and it's like, well, that was that. And I think I've hit a point where it's like, I think I've had my fill of this game, and I had my enjoyment with doing kind of the normal runs, and that's going to be good enough for me, I think.
So would you say you would recommend the game?
Overall, definitely, I would recommend it, with the caveat, I don't think the game gives you much warning in this transition from like kind of the floor 51 to the final boss. And there are some adjustments I've made that I think have helped with that, but it's a big difficulty spike, and I think the game doesn't really kind of communicate that. So playing the game to floor 51 is, playing the game in general, I think is fun. Like there's just like this, it's a classic deck builder, but you have this additional layer of like getting these relics, which have some crazy interactions with your deck. So it sort of has these added complexities, and sometimes the events can do some crazy things. Like, so I definitely think the game is fun, and I would definitely recommend it. Just with the caveat that once you get to that stage of like trying to reach the final boss, like that is way more punishing, and like you have to play the game a certain way, and even then it can be it can just not work out.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so, I was also just getting frustrated in wanting to build cohesive decks, and wanting certain cards, and like I might get one or two of them early on and be like, all right, like I'm getting a good start to this type of deck, and then just not find any cards to supplement that after that, and be like, well, I can't really build the deck I want because I'm just not getting the card drops I want.
So where would you fall on that question, Plex?
I think to me it just depends on what you're looking for. Like I think this game, like the kind of the basic play of it, like kind of the core of it, I think is generally fun, and I did enjoy playing through on the base difficulty through the first 3 acts, floor 51, like Ryan said. Like, I think that's fun, and I enjoyed seeing that with each of the 3 classes, which have different cards and that kind of stuff. I think the process of building a deck and seeing the relics and that kind of stuff, like, I think that's fun. I think if you're someone who, like, can play that and be like, all right, that was worth the money and the time, and kind of peace out after that, I think it's fun. I think if you're someone who's like, I gotta beat everything in this game, then it's going to depend on your personal tolerance level for how much random stuff can fall your way or not, because you're going to have to go through some headaches.
About how long do you think it would take you to do floor 51 with the 3 classes?
I think a successful run,
probably like an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe tops.
Yeah, most of my runs, looking at the clock, have been between like 1.5 to 2.5 hours.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so if you just did 3 successful runs without failing, I would say you're probably looking in the like 4 to 6 hour range.
Okay.
I had a few failed runs before I did that, so my time was probably longer than that. But I would guess, if you wanted to pick it up, do 1 successful run with each of the 3 classes, I would just guess you're probably looking in the 8 to 10 hour range, counting failed runs.
Yeah, I think like I did my first, if we're talking about just 451, no final boss, I think my first run with the Ironclad was successful, like first try. It took a couple with the, like maybe 2 with the silent and like 3 or 4 with the defect.
That's actually really interesting. Mine was the reverse.
Really?
Yeah, it took me like 3-ish tries, give or take. I don't remember off the top of my head with the Ironclad, and then took me like 1 less try with the silent, and then I think the defect I got my first try.
That's so funny.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of that's just due to the random nature of the game. Like, I feel like I lucked out a lot with my defect run, for example.
Some of it for sure, yeah. Plus, I remember, I think on my very first run, I tried like some cards that just didn't synergize because his mechanics are a little less cut and dry.
Yeah, the defect is the weird one.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
I had also, because I played the game in early access, I knew how the defect worked. So when I got to run in the full game release, I kind of had an idea what to do.
So I will say a couple more things. One is that if you do decide to go for the final boss run, the game has a fast mode option, which kind of cuts down the animations.
I didn't realize that. That would be nice.
Highly recommend it. Yeah, I mean, if you're going
to
go for that, like it's a much better way to play. The other thing is I guess I have a little bit of a story about like my first clear of the final boss, which kind of represents both what I like and some of my frustrations about the game. After I had played it, I took a bit of a break because, like you said, I hit that sort of frustration wall. But the game is fun, and it kind of scratches an itch for me of like just having a short game where you're kind of like playing with the cards. So I decided to jump back into it and just, it's a goal to shoot for, and the gameplay experience was fun. So I was like, okay, well, I'll play the Ironclad and try to get to the final boss with him. And I had plenty of failed runs along the way. Some near successes, which were kind of heartbreaks. But the run where I actually beat the final boss was kind of funny because I started out. So at the beginning of each run, sometimes you have a choice of like a boon, or some bonus that you can get. So I had been having sort of a frustrating, series of losses. So I was like, well, I'll try something a little more risky. So I think I traded like 7 of my max HP to get a rare relic. And I got a pretty good one. I got the Torii, which reduces any damage you would take. That was, if it's 5 or less damage, it just makes you take 1 damage instead, which is pretty nice. Because if your opponent's like hitting you with a bunch of weak attacks, they'll just all drop to 1 damage. So that was a really good relic.
Yeah, true.
So then I was playing along, and I was trying to synergize with that relic. So I was taking pretty defensive cards, and then I hit this event where you basically have the choice to sort of become a vampire.
Mm-hmm.
So you lose like 30% of your max health. But it replaces all your strikes with a card called Bite, which heals you.
I've seen that event.
Yeah, so that card heals you for like 2 HP.
Mm-hmm.
So I have this deck, and then I think I might have lost some max HP along the way. So I have this deck with 50 max HP, which is down from like 80. And I make it to the final boss, and I figure he's just going to cream me, but I have cards like Disarm, which reduces your opponent's strength, and I have like Flame Barrier, which retaliates anytime you take damage, and then I have all these bites, which kind of heal you up. Mm-hmm. So I figure he's just going to hit me with one of these huge haymakers and just because I have no max HP.
50 max HP, that you're in one-shot range.
Yeah, but actually between, I guess, all the good defensive cards and like reducing his strength and stuff, and then I just got, I ended up, because the deck was strong, I could kind of get a bunch of good relics. So I ended up pulling it out within a turn or two. So that was kind of it represents some of the stuff I like, in that the game has all these interesting interactions where I had this relic, which kind of
Yeah.
Made low damage attacks, so I could take things that lowered my opponent's strength, and then I got these. I happened to layer on these bite cards, which could heal me back. So it sort of had this like
good synergy.
This like low HP, but it's not that hard to heal kind of. But then at the same time, that stuff kind of had to click.
Yeah, and that's what I feel the main difference is between just doing a normal run through floor 51 and doing a run all the way through the final boss. Is I feel like doing a floor 51 run, you don't need as much stuff to click, so it's like you can kind of play around with the mechanics, and like it'll still be punishing in that if like things can go wrong and you can lose. Like I have lost normal runs. But it doesn't feel like it has to come together so perfectly so that if you have one or two random things like go against you, you're still fine.
Yeah.
And the difference between that and doing the true final boss is I feel like that one you need a lot of stuff to click, and so much of that is just not under your control that it can be frustrating.
Yeah. Yep. I kind of feel the same way. I mean, yeah, like I said, I think I've learned some things like which have helped make it a little more consistent. But yeah, it's definitely like if you get an okay but not great deck, and then you get to the final boss, like he's probably just going to cream you.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some of that going on. Yeah. So that's all I have for Slay the Spire. I guess an update on The Witcher. Probably like another 10 or so hours in from where I was last time, and I've been enjoying it.
Are you still in Velen? I don't know where you were last time.
Yeah, I think I'm close to coming out of Velen. Like I've been wrapping up side quests, but I think there were like 2 main quests there. I think I've pretty much nailed those.
Gotcha. So you've done the Red Baron and the Witches of the Woods or whatever.
Yeah, I just finished the Bloody Baron and like a side quest for him.
Nice.
So yeah, I overall, I mean, I like some things about that game and I don't like some things about it. So far I'm still enjoying it. I guess I'll see how things go. I like, obviously it's got some really high quality writing and storytelling. Like, the dialogue and cinematic stuff is good. I like the design of the combat and like some of the ideas that have gone into it, although I don't always think the execution gets it. And I mean, when I say I like the design of it, like I like the fact that you kind of have like the 5 signs. I like the fact that the enemies and monsters tend to be kind of like thematically and mechanically weak to specific things. I like the idea that you have to prepare for the fights, or that, you generally want to prepare for most fights, especially tough fights. It definitely has sort of the whole monster hunting vibe.
Yeah.
And I like the Witcher senses, not necessarily even related to the combat. I like just that sort of whole detective mechanic. They might lean on it a little too hard, but I sort of like that as a way for developers to communicate information and like, you can kind of go into this mode and it's like, should I be looking for something here? But, I do think the combat boils down to, like, I think you do a lot of fighting of monsters, and I think blocking and parrying are way too weak against monsters. So you pretty much just, for me at least, I spend all my time dodge rolling.
Oh yeah.
And then, like, maybe I'm missing something, but like the way Geralt like often will spin around whenever he's swinging his sword, like can be like, I don't know, like it doesn't always feel like I'm in full control. So I have to be a bit more conservative about like the whole counterattacking thing. Because like I'll see an opening and I'll like do like a shift click or a click to try and get like let's say I do a click to like do a quick strike, and then Geralt like starts spinning around and doing this like really elaborate like and the monster just swings at me. It's not like I can say, well, let's just do like a quick poke and then back off or whatever.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely some of that. I guess the other thing I would say that I'm not sure how I feel about, and I guess we'll see how this goes, is the game is very like, I don't know if it's like the word I'm looking for is like gritty or mature or, I'm not sure exactly the word I'm looking for.
It's a dark fantasy. Like like that world sucks.
Yeah, it's a combination of like some of that. Yeah, like, the peasants, a lot of the peasants are really kind of like stupid and have these like, I don't know. Yeah, a lot of the stuff about like, the whole Bloody Baron quest is very like, it's basically getting into like domestic abuse. And, Geralt is like a playboy. And so, they lean into some of that. And like, yeah, a lot of the peasants they treat as like these stupid country hicks. And, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like, I guess some of that stuff I find a bit off-putting. So we'll see. Like I was going through the Bloody Baron quest and I was like, man, this is kind of like, I mean, I don't know if you call it realism or like, it's just like very like kind of heavy stuff. Like,
yeah, no, it's that. Yeah, that's a rough quest line. I mean, that was actually one of my favorite quest lines in the game from a story standpoint, and but you're totally right that it's heavy stuff. Like it is, they don't shy away from stuff in that one, and it, like, I thought they pulled it off well. I thought the execution of that story was very good, but it is not like, this is not your very lighthearted fantasy story. Like it can be brutal at times.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll see. I guess like, I don't mind some degree of realism, but at the same time, like I think there are some things which just, I mean, they're very hard stories to tell, and like and also like I'm not sure if that's because even during that quest line, like Geralt is getting pulled into this stuff, and like a lot of times his response or one of his responses are like, why are you telling me this? Like, why are you getting me involved in like all of this? And like, as a player, in some cases, I felt like that. It's like, hey, I don't want to know about your family history. And like,
that's kind of a lot of RPGs.
I definitely don't want to participate in like what you've, been doing. Like, so like, let me go around this.
You don't want to, deal with the leprechaun?
Well, that was pretty disgusting. Which I did. I mean, but that was very grotesque. So anyway,
Witch's World's a rough one. Yeah, it's a very rich world though, which I really like. I feel like there are very few worlds. Like it is very dark. It is very heavy. At times grotesque, but I think it's also a very rich world that's fascinating to see. And I enjoyed my time in that world for sure. I also totally agree with you on the like my biggest complaint with The Witcher and all three of them has always been the combat does not feel great. It sounds like you're playing mouse and keyboard. I wonder if controller might feel a little better. I played with controller. It still wasn't great, but I wonder if that might be a little better. That game seems designed more for a controller.
That would be interesting. Yeah. I don't know.
They've improved the combat with each game. Like Witcher 2 has better combat than Witcher 1 and 3 is better than 2, but it's still, to me, that's still always been the weak point of the series for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting. But I definitely like some of the ideas they put into it. But yeah, like, I think just some of the controlling and like the way the dodging mechanics work, both for you and for the monsters. Like, a lot of times you'll swing at the monster and they'll just be like, oh, nope, no damage. So, yep, that's all.
So I assume, it sounds like you're not hating it. Are you planning to keep going with it?
Yeah, for now. I mean, there were definitely some times, like, because in Velen, you have the quest with Kyra, like when you first meet her, and then you have the whole Bloody Baron quest line, and I'm kind of like, man, this is really like in your face with like the Geralt's a playboy, and like, we're getting into like some heavy stuff here. So, but for now, I think I'm past some of that. And like you said, like when you're not in some of that, like a lot of the stories are genuinely engaging. So we'll just see. I plan to keep going for now and just see like where some of that stuff, where the story goes, and if it gets to be a little too much for my tastes.
Yeah. The next section of the game is in Novigrad and gets a little more. You're in a city, so it gets a little more about like politics, like the inner politics of that game's cities and that kind of stuff. So it's a little less like in the country, if that makes sense. Yeah,
that will be interesting.
And then that game basically operates in 3 acts. You have Velen, which is like country wasteland area, and then you have Novigrad, which is big city, and then you have Ardskellige, which is like Viking islands.
Yeah.
So each of them kind of have their own flavor, which is interesting. But cool. Anything else?
Nope, that covers it for me.
Cool deal. Where we are going to take a quick break, I believe, and then I'll talk about what I've been playing, and we may have a new guest joining us. So stay tuned, and we will be right back. Hello and welcome back to episode 54 of the ATACS podcast. We have taken a break, we have refreshed ourselves, and we have picked up a new panel member. As before the break, I am Flex, joined by Ryan and Will, and we are now joined by Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, a wild Nate appears.
He does. He has pooed a baby and is now able to speak into a microphone.
Yep. Baby is now asleep.
So we've heard what Will and Ryan have been playing, and now we're going to hear from Nate, who has been playing a game I also played a lot of since the last time I was on the podcast, and that game is Wargroove from Chucklefish, spiritual successor to the Advance Wars series.
Yeah. What have Chucklefish done other stuff?
They have. I cannot remember off the top of my head.
The name sounds familiar for some reason.
I definitely recognize the logo.
Yeah.
From something else. I'm doing research now, so you can go ahead and just start us off. What did you think of Wargroove?
I liked it. Chucklefish did Stardew Valley. That's what they're most famous for.
Oh, I was like, I know I've heard that name before because I played a lot of Stardew Valley.
Yeah,
and Starbound
is a publisher, so they didn't develop either of these games, I don't think.
Gotcha.
But they've published some things. They also apparently published Risk of Rain, which we played.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Blast from the past.
Oh, no, they did develop Wargroove. So, okay, the games they've developed are Starbound and Wargroove, but they've also published a lot of games, including Stardew Valley. So you would have seen their logo on Stardew Valley.
Yeah.
But anyway, I like Wargroove a lot. It's very much Advance Wars.
It's fantasy Advance Wars.
Yeah, I've been following this game for years. This is one of those indie games that feels like it's been in development forever, and I've been following it for a long time. And there have been a couple of like Advance Wars sequels, like what was it, Heavy Metal came out a year or two ago, that just didn't seem to quite do it. And it kept being like, oh, Wargroove's going to be the one. And they, for better or worse, they have.
I mean, it is the one, right? It is Advance Wars.
It is the one. They have made Advance Wars like after playing it a couple hours, I'm like, wow, this is like 1-to-1 Advance Wars. Like, you can basically map every unit in Wargroove to Advance Wars. Like, there's a parallel.
Yeah.
Like it is very similar to Advance Wars, and that's both a good and a bad thing for me. In the good, like, I really like Advance Wars, and it has been a solid decade since the last official Advance Wars game.
Right.
So it's filling a need that has not been met in a long time.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't know that they necessarily have done it better than Advance Wars did it. And I feel like being a decade later, I wish they would have done something different or better, like something to distinguish itself a little more, I think.
Sure.
I think that's my ultimate like want for this game. Like, I feel like what they did, I feel like they have replicated the Advance Wars formula. They've nailed it. What's there is done very well. And maybe this is greedy, but I feel like I wanted it to be something more than that.
Right.
That makes sense.
It might be a little greedy because I do think it's just like a really well-made package.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think it's probably, I don't know. I still might like a couple things about Advance Wars better, but I think what they set out to do, they have basically nailed.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't think that's necessarily greedy for a franchise like this because, I'll be curious because I do want to play Wargroove at some point as well because, like, I played Days of Ruin and talked about it, and I was a little disappointed with how it turned out for me. But at the same time, like, I think something like Fire Emblem Awakening kind of made enough of a change to that franchise to really breathe new life into it. And even something like Stardew Valley, like, yeah, it did a lot of things that Harvest Moon did, but it layered on some of its own stuff.
Yeah, and Stardew Valley is a good,
really well.
Yeah, Stardew Valley is a good reference point because I feel like we've had a lot of indie games in the past 5-6 years that have been clear spiritual successors to older games. Like Stardew Valley was for Harvest Moon, like Axiom Verge was for Metroid. Like, there's a whole list of these kind of things, and I feel like a lot of those better indie games have done something new or interesting to kind of update those classics in a modern way. Or Bloodstained Curse of the Moon with Castlevania 3 that came out last year. Like, and I'm not sure that Wargroove makes the steps that those games make in bringing back those classic games.
Right.
This feels more like a faithful recreation than an advancement, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But that said, Advance Wars still works. Like, it's still good.
Yeah, it's still a good game overall, for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like you liked it overall.
Yeah. And I guess I didn't play all the Advance Wars games, so I think maybe in the later ones they added hero units, but that's the main difference between Wargroove and the Advance Wars that I did play, which is that the commanders are hero units on the battlefield that are really strong.
Yeah, and that was the Ruins' big advancement, was adding them on the field. And the other new thing I do like a lot, my favorite thing about Wargroove actually is a new thing, and it's the critical hit mechanic. So every unit has a condition that, if met, leads to a critical hit, so they deal more damage.
Right.
And it's typically very simple things. So like your basic soldier gets a critical hit if they're attacking next to your commander.
Right.
The pikemen, spearmen get a critical hit if you have two spearmen next to each other.
Yeah, and it's all positioning map-based stuff instead of it being like, oh, you have a 10% chance of a critical hit. If you meet this positioning condition, then you get the critical hit, which makes the tactics way more interesting.
Yeah, because what it does is it really puts a bigger focus on your positioning, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it works really well.
Mm-hmm. So that's the one thing I feel like I would have loved to have seen back in Advance Wars in the day.
Yeah.
But I do think that... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to start talking about the things I like about the game that, even though they are in Advance Wars, I still like them because, not everybody played Advance Wars, so it's probably worth talking about some of those things. I think the mix of units overall across the whole game is pretty strong. Me and you have talked about this a little bit, that maybe like the sea units aren't super strong, but I think just like the mix of land units is like a good, simple list of interesting units that all serve different purposes. And so when you have like a elongated battle and all the different positioning based critical hits, and the maps are very simple but like have different terrain types, and you mix all these things together, I think it just works really well to create moments of like, okay, how am I going to maximize my movement this turn to both, clear some units from the board this turn if possible, but also like I was always thinking 2 or 3 turns ahead in this game, which I usually find hard to do in tactics games.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just something that I've gotten better at by playing a few more of these, like some of the more recent Fire Emblems and, Into the Breach and things like that. Maybe I've just gotten a little better at them.
Developing your tactics brand.
Yeah, but I definitely found it much easier in this game to very clearly think 2-3 turns in advance and see the benefit I got from that.
Yeah.
And I think it's just because everything is very clear. All the terrain is very clear. All the units have very clear roles and capabilities.
Yeah. I do think in some ways they kind of present that stuff more clearly than Advance Wars sometimes did. If you read the unit descriptions for each unit, you can pretty clearly get a sense of what their intended purpose is.
Right. So I really like that. That by itself, and just like the charm of the game, like it visually looks really nice. It has like kind of a goofy personality. You could
Which
say
Advance
like
Wars was very goofy too.
Yeah. It's probably pretty similar in tone to that, like kind of silly and childish, but it's not really like, I wouldn't say like, oh, this is a game for kids in a demeaning way. It's just
it's
just goofy.
It's very. Like, it is a very thoughtful and challenging game.
Right.
You said it was fantasy themed?
Yes, it's fantasy themed.
Yeah, so your units are like swordsmen and pikemen and knights and
mages and stuff like that.
Archers.
Archers.
It's kind of neat.
Yeah. And then all the heroes are
commander.
Yeah, one of the commanders is a dog.
Good dog. He's the best dog.
They make jokes regularly about him being a good boy.
He's a good boy, and they talk about how majestic he is quite often.
Oh, that's great.
There's one side mission where you play as the so there are 4 factions, like Advance Wars. Actually, I guess Advance Wars has 5, but
it technically has 5, kind of.
Yeah, I guess so. But anyway, you're playing. There's a side mission where you play as a character who's portrayed as kind of on one of the enemy faction, who are vampires, by the way.
Yeah.
And you're like the main kingdom. The orange star of this game is called Cherrystone Kingdom, and you're fighting against them, and you're like, who's this Cherrystone commander? Like, I'm going to show him what's what. And you like go through the whole map, and
she's like trying to figure out who the commander is and find him.
Yeah. And she's like, oh, this dastardly commander, like I'm going to take them down, all this stuff, like just really getting bent out of shape about Cherrystone's commander. And then at the very end of the mission, she finds out that their commander is a dog. And she's just like, what? A dog? Like,
yeah, he's great. He's like a big white fluffy dog in full suit of armor, and he doesn't actually fight. So when you when you do like the combat animations, most of them like run up and hit the other person. But he just like has a little like bodyguard unit of crossbowmen that just shoot at the enemy while he's like chasing his tail in the background or like rolling over.
That almost reminds me a little bit of like the Undertale's like Lesser Dog and Greater Dog, where they just kind of throw in this like dog in a suit of armor for kicks or whatever. It's
very silly and goofy and cute, and I love Caesar. He's a good boy.
Yeah, he's fun. All the commanders, he has a cool ability too. So all the commanders they call him their groove.
Yeah.
So I guess this is where Wargroove comes from. But they all have a quote unquote groove that charges up over time, and it'll charge faster if they kill units. So each of the commanders has a different ability, and Caesar's, he expends his turn to refresh the turn of all the units adjacent to him. So he can basically give up his turn to allow up to 4 other units to take an extra turn, which, used in the right situations, could be very powerful.
Yes. You can also use that to refresh like barracks and stuff to produce more units, which is something I didn't realize at first.
That.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. Still not as good as Muru's teleportation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hers is by far, hers is just broken.
Yeah.
Which I do think there's a little bit of a balance with the commanders. I think
some of them are just better.
I'm sorry?
Some of the commanders' abilities are just strictly better than others, for sure.
Yeah, some of them seem not great, and...
Do you end up choosing a commander each mission or whatever?
In the campaign, it's dictated. Each mission you play as a different commander.
Okay.
But if you're playing multiplayer or just battle maps against the AI, you get to choose your commander.
Is that where you guys are observing the balance issues?
I'm more thinking just because I mostly just played through the campaign.
Yeah,
but even doing that,
some are more useful.
Yeah, going through the campaign, you eventually play as every commander at least once, I think.
Yeah,
and it was very clearly some of them are just this groove doesn't seem that useful, and then you play as some like Nuru, and hers is wow, this is amazing. So it was mostly just playing the campaign and just taking stock of what I was playing with.
It could be that there's a competitive online meta that throws all of our assumptions about that out the window, but by playing...
So I played one multiplayer match online, and I picked Nuru, and my opponent picked Nuru.
Okay, good.
So...
Did you win?
Well... Okay.
That shouldn't be a complicated question.
So technically, no, I did not.
Okay.
So I was playing this match, and at the start, I was like, do I have a turn timer? I don't see a turn timer on screen.
Okay.
So I was like, I guess there's no turn timer? Because in this is a turn-based tactics game, and
you could just
you always think there should be a turn timer, otherwise someone can just stall forever.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I don't see a timer. So I just wasn't thinking about it. And so I was playing normally, and I was winning, and I was about to make a really good move. I had built a dragon, which is basically a bomber from Advance Wars. And they had basically an anti-air... They had a witch, which is basically your anti-air fighter jet.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Nuru's Groove filled up, and I was going to move her in position to summon in a mage, which is your anti-air ground unit, go kill their witch, and save my dragon. And I was just looking at the board, making sure I had thought everything through correctly. And then my turn ended.
Oh, no.
Due to a turn timer that I was not aware of.
That it doesn't display at all. Wow.
It's possible it displayed it and I just didn't notice it, but at the very beginning I did look around for a timer and I did not see it. So
wow.
Either it was not displayed or I just really overlooked it. Either way, it was a big bummer, and I immediately quit the match because at that point it's I hadn't spent any of my money that turn. I hadn't moved half of my units. It was basically a wasted turn. And in games like that, where every move counts, a wasted turn is just crippling.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
So at that point, I was like, well, I quit. So that sucked. But,
Yeah.
oh well.
Oh well.
But yeah, I really enjoyed the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of complaints from like reviewers and stuff of it being too long and hard.
It's a little long.
Yeah, it is a little long, but I also remember Advance Wars campaigns being long and hard.
Yeah. I mean, that's what those games were too, for sure.
Yeah. So again, for better or worse, it's replicating that.
Yeah.
Do they do? One of the things I got annoyed with Days of Ruin is that I don't know if they did a ton of the like, mystery, like stuff randomly appears out of nowhere, but they do like your enemies kind of break the game's rules. It's like, oh, well, we'll give this AI like this condition where they can just drop bombs on the map anytime they feel like it, and it's like, man, this is a fun campaign. Like my opponent can just do whatever they want. Like,
it's nothing quite as extreme as just like dropping random bombs across the map, but they do. I mean, the AI definitely has advantages in most of the campaign maps where they'll just get spawned random units, or they just start with a ton more stuff than you, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the typical thing is they start with more villages and units than you do.
Yeah, so they basically are able to produce higher quality units every turn and more of them, and they start with more units. But they kind of have to do that because the AI in this game is kind of garbage.
Yeah, so probably my single biggest complaint about this game is the AI is just not good.
Yeah.
So you can really outsmart them with a lot less than they have.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
Which I guess, like you said, that's sort of faithful to those campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's been so long enough since I played Advance Wars, but I wouldn't be surprised if Advance Wars also didn't have great AI.
Yeah.
I do generally think I don't remember any missions just being frustrating, though, in the way it sounds like you're describing from Advance Wars, Ryan, but I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, Nate, but I feel like they did a pretty good job of having varied map designs without relying on, like, frustrating gimmicks.
Yeah, generally speaking, I would definitely say that's true. The stuff I didn't like was, like, the Fog of War levels.
Which there weren't many of those.
There were only a few. I didn't really enjoy those. And then a couple... There's only one level, and it's the very last level, where they kind of like throw in a weird extra mechanic that just throws off all your plans, and I didn't really like that.
Yeah, that one was probably more of what Ryan's thinking of just like they telegraph it, so like there are ways to mitigate it, like you always see it coming.
But there are some situations where you can't do much about it, and it can cripple you.
Yeah, that sounds like I remember because in Days of Ruin there were 2 or 3 maps where like one they would like the AI could just choose to drop bombs on your units, which like you said, it's hard to build around. Like it's like, well, if I build like a heavy tank and they just decide to take off half its health, like that's huge. Like that's just a huge wasted investment.
Right.
And then the last map, they gave the AI free spawns and then, a bunch of those like artillery effects. And it's like, this is just a slog. Like, I'm not really strategizing around the game's like core mechanics. I'm trying to strategize around this like broken, gimmicky AI thing that's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's like an overwhelming amount of that in the campaign. Most of the maps are pretty straightforward, and you can see everything that's happening, and they're not just going to come out of nowhere and do some gimmicky stuff. So I don't think that's a huge problem. Also, if you just want even battles, they do have an arcade mode where you can play as each of the commanders, and it will just put you through 5 fights against other commanders on random like competitive maps where you're on an even footing with them.
Yeah, those are mirrored.
And so they're all balanced. But those end up being pretty easy if you're playing on normal because the AI is just not good enough.
Yeah.
Right.
But then you can play on hard.
Gives
the AI double income.
Yeah.
That's gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a good solution.
No, it's not. The better solution would have been to make their AI better.
Yeah. So, overall, I think both the campaign and the arcade mode work. They become very easy once you have learned enough of the systems, I think, in general. And the biggest problem with them is, like you said, the AI.
Yeah. The AI is my single biggest complaint with this game.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I actually really enjoyed the campaign. It was maybe a little bit long.
Yeah.
And I think there may be a little bit of balance. We kind of alluded to this earlier. The water units seem a little weird.
Yeah, they're just kind of awkward.
But overall, I really did enjoy the campaign. And I keep saying this is Advance Wars, but it is nice to have an Advance Wars style game back, because there have been a lot of tactics games in that decade. Like, we've seen XCOM be revitalized. We saw Fire Emblem get revitalized. Like, there have been a lot of good stuff in the tactical, like turn-based tactical space. But Advance Wars is a different thing still, because there's an economy aspect to Advance Wars that's not in like Fire Emblem or XCOM.
Right.
And Wargroove has that as well, where you're earning money and you're buying units and that kind of stuff. And it's not, whereas in Fire Emblem and XCOM, you start with a small squad of units and that's the squad you have the entire mission. These stuff like Advance Wars and Wargroove, you're buying units and managing your income and that kind of stuff. And that makes for a different flow of gameplay that's nice to have back.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of sort of the like economy game and base maintenance game of something like a StarCraft or other real-time strategies, and applies that to a turn-based tactics game. Yeah,
which is really always, I mean, that was the genius of Advance Wars originally, and it's still cool.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say about it, and then we'll see if Nate has any final thoughts, is this game has a ridiculously robust campaign editor and map editor.
Yes, it does.
Like, I took one look at it and was like, wow, this seems too involved for me to mess with right now. But like, there seems to be some level of like scripting stuff in there. And like, you can make your own campaigns where you get a world map and you can make main missions and side missions, and you can create cutscenes and write dialogue. And like, it seems incredibly involved that you could make full games within this editor. It's kind of impressive.
Yeah, like somebody made the first Advance Wars, the complete campaign in this.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like basically the equivalent. I mean, it's still using all the same units and stats from Wargroove, but like
those units map 1-to-1 enough that
they map close enough, and that they could make the same maps with the same layouts and like the same storyline with cutscenes and dialogue, just subbing in the fantasy units and commanders instead of the military style of Advance Wars.
Do you think there's like that anything could come up in the community that would grab your guys' attention, where you'd be like, wow, the community made this amazing campaign, and like, you know, that kind of just adds.
I bet there could be.
Yeah, like I would totally be willing to, like, if I was aware of a really amazing community campaign, like I would totally be willing to play it. I think discoverability is as always with user created stuff, discoverability is a challenge.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I think you would have to be kind of tuned into the community to find that stuff. But I could totally see somebody making a campaign that was like, oh, wow, this is as good or better than the main campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think the potential is absolutely there, and I would be willing to play something like that if I found it and was confident I was spending my time on something worthwhile.
Right.
Because those tools seem really robust. Like, that may actually, in the long run, be like the secret best thing about Wargroove is introducing really good creation tools. To that formula.
And then it also kind of doubles down on the bummer of the AI, where like you can make this really elaborate, cool level in the campaign, and then the AI is just like, I'm going to run over here.
Yeah. But it's a really cool game. I like it a lot. Not perfect, but I really enjoy playing it and would recommend it for anyone who likes Advance Wars style games.
Definitely. Sure. And it's a great option on the Switch.
Yep. Also on everything else.
Yeah, it's on everything.
But yeah, it seems very well suited for the Switch.
Yeah.
As do many games.
Any final thoughts or questions on Wargroove?
Yeah, I think that's good.
If that's all for that, I'm going to turn it over to Nate and ask what else you want to talk about.
I've been playing a handful of things. I guess I'll really quickly wrap up the long discussion we had on Sunless Skies last time I was on here. Toot your horn for Space Trains.
Space Trains?
That game is, if like I said, if you played Sunless Sea, you mostly know what you're getting. It's pretty similar, but I think those two games are so unique and different from a lot of other things. Really happy I played Sunless Skies, even though I didn't finish Sunless Sea, and I'm really happy that I finished it. I think I described my captain last time we talked about it. He's an aspiring poet who wanted to explore the Sunless Skies and write his epic poem. That was what it's called, your ambition. So each captain you make has an end goal ambition that if you complete it, then you retire them. And that's if they don't die beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up having I had a lull in the middle of my campaign, I would say, where I was I'm not making any progress on this thing. I don't know where to go. I'm kind of slogging in this game a little bit. But then I hit a point where I found the next objective that I needed for my epic poem that I was writing. And it was just now I'm off to the races. I was just finding all the cool stuff I needed, just discovering all these crazy stories out in the new areas that I hadn't been to yet. Recruiting different weird groups and people onto my space train and talking to them about their life and what they've been doing. And it just kind of ended up with me just playing this game almost nonstop for 3 days. Nice. Just absorbing all this ridiculous space lore that this game has that I can't even summarize in anything coherent, but it's just embedded in my brain now. And I don't know, I finished that poem and it was all right, are you ready to retire your captain? And I was yeah, I mean, he's seen everything. What else do I have to do? And retired and turned off the game and just had it wash over me in a really weird way that doesn't happen for me that often anymore. So it was just really satisfying to finish that.
Nice. So now that you've, I asked you this last time, but now that you've finished it,
yes.
Do you think this is a stronger game than Sunless Seas?
I think so. And I want to qualify that by just saying maybe I just didn't stick with Sunless Seas enough. Mm-hmm. Because I played that on the standard mode, which has permadeath. And when I died after 8 hours of playing, I just didn't go back to it.
Right.
So I played this one on merciful mode, and when I died, I just reloaded a checkpoint.
Yeah.
And I had a way better time doing that instead.
Yeah.
Did Sunless Seas have a merciful mode equivalent?
I'm pretty sure it did, but you had to go into an advanced setting menu when you started or something like that. It wasn't as clear as it is in Sunless Skies.
Right. Yeah, I thought it might have had something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember it being there, but it wasn't something I felt like if I remember playing it at the time and feeling if I turned that on, I wasn't playing the real game.
Right.
Whereas in this one, it's just hey, do you want permadeath or not? It's up to you.
Yeah.
But anyway,
how many captains are there, and do you choose at the start which one you want, or is it random?
You make it, yeah. So you create a character.
Oh, okay. It's a creation.
And then you pick a handful of things, and you're actually kind of building your character throughout the game. Because every time you level up, you aren't just putting skill points into something. You're actually adding little anecdotes to your character's backstory, and that gives you different bonuses. So it's functionally the same thing as just putting stat points in, but that's one thing that I love about this game is that it wastes absolutely no opportunities to add a layer of lore or a story to anything.
Right.
Like, just, there is never a point where it's like, I don't know, this is a mechanical thing, we're not going to worry about it. It's like, no, we're going to explain this in exhaustive detail, and it's
Right.
going to add some lore to the story or give some character to something.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
I was on the fence about Sunless Skies and ultimately never played it, but I think I am going to give this one a shot.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try as long as anyone going into it understands that it is a game where you spend most of your time reading.
All right.
So as long as you're okay with that.
Sometimes I love that. Sometimes I hate that. So we'll see.
Yeah.
This lands.
The other main thing that I'll...
Well, Nate, were you one of the ones when you played Spire? Did you read the lore book the whole time?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it just gives me a benchmark here.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of Spire, I've played.
Hey, nice
segue.
Yeah, good job, Will.
Wah, wah.
I've been playing the recent Supergiant game, Hades, which is an early access roguelike, which is totally different from their other games.
Yep. They finally decided they couldn't make, they had to be done with traditional release. It's done 10-ish hour single player games.
Mm-hmm.
They needed to get on the early access procedurally generated roguelike bandwagon.
That's right. They needed to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Hades is.
Mm-hmm.
It is, so I think it definitely is still a Supergiant game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in, I think, two main ways. It plays kind of like Bastion, if you played that. Kind of an isometric top-down view. The different weapons have different properties, different timing elements, things like that. And it is still fairly, I would say, like, still very focused on its characters and its lore and its narrative, even though it's a procedural roguelike kind of dungeon crawler type of game.
Which, to be fair, like, those games actually, I think, do often do lore in kind of interesting ways. Like,
yeah,
they tend to be more about like kind of soft lore than like hard characters. But if you think about games like Dead Cells or NetHack or whatever, like, there's usually kind of like an undertone of storytelling.
Yeah, definitely.
Even Slay the Spire kind of has its own little story bits.
Yeah,
I digress.
No, you're totally right that those games do a lot of like world building and lore stuff within their procedural generation. I think Supergiant's take on it is more character focused.
Okay.
Is what I would say is the difference. So you have your hub area, which is the House of Hades. You are the prince, Hades' son. This is all Greek mythology, by the way. I should have probably mentioned at the top.
So where's Kratos?
Kratos has not appeared.
He's in Sparta.
It would be kind of funny if he showed up.
That would be an awesome nod.
You're just like
the final boss. So I hope the final boss of the full release is Kratos.
Yeah, and he's like on the way to kill Hades.
Yeah,
that would be pretty funny. But
great.
yeah, it's it's unfinished. It's early access. They're still working on it. The way they're doing their content rollouts is a major patch a major patch comes out every month. And I don't think they've added any new areas with that yet, but I know that they're planning on doing that. It's planned to be on early access all this year and then come out fully next year sometime.
My main question that I really have for this, I think your kid has questions too.
Yeah, she definitely has questions.
I'm not sure they're about Hades, but she has questions. My main question is, I've liked all the Supergiants games. the trailer for this looked really cool, and I agree. It looked like Bastion more than any of their other games, just from a perspective and play style. But my question is always do you think this is worth playing in early access versus waiting, or like how is the early access experience?
Right. So I think that's really just up to the individual. Like I was kind of planning on just waiting for the full release, but I had free time and kind of just felt like checking it out, so I jumped in.
Right.
I don't necessarily know if this will like gain anything for being in early access unless you're just somebody who really gets into just running the dungeon over and over with whatever content is there, and then like, oh, they added this new thing, cool. That seems to be what they've been doing so far.
Right.
So I don't think there's certainly nothing wrong with just waiting until it's done, because there will be the full story and all the characters and all the weapons available at that point.
Yeah. Do you have any idea? Have they said if any of your early access progress will transition, or if they'll wipe stuff? Or I don't even know if this is the kind of game where you actually earn progress.
Yeah, there's a lot of persistent progress. I don't know. I would guess that you'd keep everything, but I haven't seen anything official on that.
Right. Because different early access games take different tacks with that. Some of them always wipe everything once they release version 1.0.
Yeah.
And some let whatever you've done carry over.
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to see if they have anything in their FAQ, but I don't.
And they may not even know that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see anything saying whether they'll wipe anything or not. I don't think they've wiped anything at this point.
Gotcha.
And it's been in early access for like 3 months now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
It was a surprise reveal, one of those, hey, we're making this game and you can play it right now.
Yeah.
They're also partnering with Epic, is that right?
Yeah, it's on the Epic Game Store.
Yeah, right now exclusive on the Epic Game Store. I wouldn't be surprised if someday it comes to PSN or Xbox Live or maybe even Steam. But
yeah, I assume once it's done, it'll come to everything, because they have actually been pretty consistent with their previous games of like trying to put their games out on everything.
Yeah.
I think you can play Bastion in like a Google Chrome browser now.
Yeah. Yeah, their games are everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now it's exclusive to the Epic Game Store.
Yeah. It's really neat though. Thinking about it outside of just the early access model, I think the combat just works really well, which I think was a little surprising for me actually, based on the early trailer and videos. It looks kind of simple, the actual gameplay, but there's a lot more depth to it than I thought there was going to be.
Yeah, good. When I first saw the trailer of this, I was like, I think this is going to live and die by how fun the combat is.
Yeah, and it is really fun. It does a really good job of having like not only the procedurally generated levels and enemy encounters, but and upgrades that you're getting, but like everything just mixes and matches very well. So you pick a weapon when you start the run, and then you'll get different upgrades. You basically get random options of 3 upgrades here and there from different. You can get boons from different gods. So Zeus might show up and say, "Hey, here are 3 different lightning abilities you can get. Pick one." Or you'll get like a straight up upgrade to your weapon, or different things like that, and they all mix together really well. So the thing I really like about it is that I haven't picked an upgrade yet and then been like, oh, I don't like that one. Like they all feel really good.
I hadn't really thought about this until you just started talking about that. But I feel like Supergiant in all of their previous games have been very smart about making it where when you get something or make a choice, all of the options feel good.
Yeah.
And now that they're doing a roguelike that has randomness, that would be exciting, because we were actually just talking about this earlier with Slay the Spire, is that you can sometimes get things that don't work out and you can feel kind of boned. And that can happen a lot in roguelikes. And I'll be curious if Hades can somehow manage to make it to where you are getting a lot of random effects, roguelike style, yet all of them feel good.
Yeah, that's been my experience so far, is that I have never gotten an upgrade during a run that didn't make me go, oh, wow, this is good.
Right. That's cool. That's exciting.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm going to keep an eye on it throughout this year, see what they add. I've finished, so there are 2 bosses in the game so far.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a run where I was able to kill the second boss, and then it's just like they actually have some funny dialogue written after that, where like you walk through the next door and it's like, and he probably died somehow, and it just shows you dying, and then it respawns you back at the beginning.
Is that like the early access is over type thing?
Yeah, and then it like pops up a message and be like, hey, that's all we have right now, come back later.
That's kind of funny.
It's charming.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, like there are still actually reasons like to keep playing it if you wanted to. Like I enjoy the combat enough that I kind of want to keep playing, but I'm just waiting to see what the next update is before I jump back in.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to play. I've liked all their stuff. I definitely want to play this. I'm going through that eternal debate of now or wait till it's out.
Yeah, I don't think there's any harm in waiting, but if you just feel like playing a cool action roguelike, it's a good one, even in its current state.
Cool. Anything else on Hades?
I think that's probably good.
All right. As for me, the main thing I've played in the past few weeks is Wargroove, because as I mentioned, that was a pretty lengthy campaign, and I did finish it and took some time. I've touched a couple other things. A couple of us played some Apex Legends. I tried out Tetris 99, aka Tetris Battle Royale. But the only other thing I'm really going to touch on here is I've continued to play the Resident Evil 2 remake. The last time I was on an episode of ATACS, I had just finished my first playthrough with Leon. Since then, I have played the B playthrough with Claire, and I'm currently nearing the end of a hardcore run with Claire. And that game is still really freaking good. The B playthroughs are really interesting because they're kind of like a remix. So they kind of you start in a different place, and they kind of put items in different places and have different solutions to some of the puzzles. So it's still a lot of the same stuff, but they remix it just enough to make it interesting. So I actually really enjoyed that run. Also, Claire's weapon set compared to Leon is like, Leon's got like these tactical weapons. It's like, for the most part, you're playing with a pistol, a shotgun, and a magnum. So it's like you got your close range area blast with the shotgun, and otherwise you're working with precision weaponry. And then Claire's weapon set is like, I don't know, I got this like flame launcher, like grenade launcher. I got a submachine gun. I got like weird electric thing. It like shoots out this electric bolt, and you hold it on them, and it like shocks them over time. She's just got like this really, really weird.
Is she a wizard?
It's yes, sure. Her weapon set is just she just gets way more guns and way weirder guns.
Yeah.
I don't know. She's fun. So her B playthrough was fun with that stuff. And then I've been playing through the hardcore mode, which is interesting, let's say.
I watched the like first little bit of your play in that where you died to the first zombie.
I wasn't going to talk about that. We weren't going to speak of such things.
I'm just helping you out, you know.
So I had read there's basically like a tutorial area before you get to the police station. It like stops you at this gas station, and you go in, and that's where your character learns, oh, hey, there are zombies. But there's just one zombie in this gas station that you have to shoot. and it's meant to be a tutorial. And I totally died on it. In hardcore. That's where I learned that zombies in hardcore take way more bullets. They move way faster, and they deal twice as much damage.
Yeah, and part of the reason I think I was interested in hearing you talk about this is because, a mutual friend of ours who is kind of a glutton for punishment, at least I sometimes feel that way, was trying this on hardcore, and I think he had gotten a certain of the way through it, and then he found that he had gotten himself in a situation that he kind of because you have to space out, when you use your ink ribbon. And yes. I think he had gotten to a place where it was just like he couldn't beat the part that he had, and he couldn't save again, and he couldn't get any. So he sort of kind of worked himself into a corner and kind of just stopped and then had to restart. And then because I think he started on hardcore and then went back and tried it the regular way.
You should never start this game on hardcore.
Yeah. And so when he talked about it being a difficult thing and how he stopped playing it, I was like, this thing must be brutal. So I was just
so there's a couple. There's a couple of things there. My hardcore run has actually not been that bad. Like I have died a couple times, but my main worry is that I'm going to get to the final boss and not have enough ammo.
Right.
That's my main worry. Otherwise, I've been doing pretty good so far, but I think Resident Evil 2, so part of what's so interesting about this game, and one of the things I like about it so much, it's so methodical, and you really want to understand the game space, and you really want to know your way around the police station like the back of your hand. And I think going into hardcore without playing standard first I mentioned that's a bad idea, because playing on standard is really useful for learning the layout of the police station, learning where items are, learning your shortcuts, learning how to get around. Because in standard, I felt like I could shoot every zombie, like kill everything, still had enough ammo, like you can save infinitely, all that stuff. In hardcore, you have to be very considerate about the bullets you use. And you cannot shoot everything because you'll run out of ammo. And I knew that going in, and I had learned by playing standard twice, once with Leon and then Claire's B playthrough, I had learned the layout of the police station pretty well. So going through hardcore, I've been very savvy about the routes I take to try and avoid as many enemies as possible. And I will also prioritize rooms where I have space to run around zombies over rooms that are crowded and I know I'm going to have to shoot things. So like I've really been trying to conserve as much ammo as possible. And that's a huge aspect of hardcore. And I would if I had played hardcore first, I would have just been shooting everything. And would probably get in this weird situation where I was just boned, because I can totally see how you could get in a situation where you're just like, I don't have enough stuff and I can't go back and get more stuff, so I'm just screwed.
Right.
Like that's totally a possibility.
Yeah.
I've actually possibly been too conservative, so I'm in the last area of the game now on hardcore, and I have like 1 billion ink ribbons.
Nice.
So I've probably not been as liberal with the ink ribbons because when I started the hardcore playthrough, I was like, I don't know how many ink ribbons they're going to give me. I have no concept of that. So I was being very conservative, but they actually give you a pretty good amount. So I have a stockpile of like 10 of them. I've also saved, every time I've saved in a new slot, so I could roll back to any slot if I wanted to.
Yeah, Ryan, they do.
Oh, okay.
What was that?
Ryan was asking if ink ribbons allowed you to save.
Yes, they do. On standard mode, you can save infinite times. That's not a concern. But hardcore is a throwback to the original Resident Evil games where ink ribbons are an item in your inventory and you need them to save, and your inventory is very limited. Which actually the toughest thing about hardcore mode compared to standard for me is the inventory, because so you start with 8 inventory slots. And in the normal game, there are 6 inventory upgrades. Each of them add 2 slots. They're like these little fanny packs, which is hilarious to me. But you find 6 of them, and each of them adds 2 inventory slots. And in hardcore mode, there's only 3 of them. So your inventory upgrades are literally halved. which is and difficult. And then you also have to carry ink ribbons. So that's been the toughest thing. But yeah, I'm making my way through it. Like I said, I'm in the final area, so I'm near the end. I'm going to try and finish that today, actually. See how it goes. But this is my third playthrough of this game, and the more I play it, the more I really like it. It's a good game. So I think this is a fantastic game, and more than that, like, I think it's a really good remake, because I never played the original Resident Evil 2, and I'm really liking this game. And it's usually I'm not someone who like cares about remakes, because it's like, I could go back and play the original, you know, like Shadow of the Colossus got remade last year, and it's like, not only did I play that game originally, but the remake just seemed to be prettying up the graphics, and I could go back and play the PS3 remake or the PS2 original and probably have, you know, roughly equally good time. But I feel like this remake is like it's almost a new game, to the point where it's like, man, if people are going to remake games to like this thoroughly, then I would be all for more remakes.
It's funny because when it first came out, you know, I had some friends that were like, dude, you going to pick up that Resident Evil 2? And like, I think it wasn't until like a week before it came out that they were like, no, man, it's a complete remake. It's not just like graphics, you know, because I had played Resident Evil 2 a couple times back in like forever ago. And so I wasn't even paying any attention to it. And then when it came out, it wasn't until it actually right before it came out that I realized that it was something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's how I normally am with remakes. When I see remakes, it's like, you know, whatever. They're just putting out the same game again. Who cares? Mm-hmm. But this one totally is a new game. And it's like, man, I wish more remakes took this level of care with like rethinking it and remaking it from the ground up to make a new modern game.
Right.
I kind of hope that's what they're doing. You know, Nintendo announced the Link's Awakening remake. And at first I was like, I don't need to play Link's Awakening again. But now I'm like, man, if they gave that the treatment that this Resident Evil 2 remake got, like, that could be awesome. And let's like, now I want all remakes to like take this approach. But
right,
we'll see. Point being, I really like this game. It's good.
Yeah, it seems cool. It's definitely on my short list.
Unless anyone else has any questions on that, I think we're going to wrap up this episode. See what everyone else has got coming up. What's on your plate, Will?
Well, probably going to continue a couple different co-op jams. Probably play some more Dresden Files. Play some more of this game, Styx, Shards of Darkness. Probably will start Anthem sometime this week.
Oh, man.
Did you pick up Anthem?
Yeah, I have it on PS4, which I guess might be I don't know. But yeah, that, and then I've been working through this like old ridiculous top-down shooter called Alien Breed 2. So I'll probably keep poking around with that.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
What you got going on, Ryan?
The Witcher 3 is the main thing on my radar that's still kind of, you know, other than replaying like Slay the Spire.
The Witcher's a long one.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Yep, that's pretty much it.
Cool. What about you, Nate?
I'm not 100% sure. I'm kind of in between a couple different things at the moment. I'll probably play a few more games of Civ 6 since that last expansion came out. And I don't know, I picked up Breath of the Wild again the other day and having fun with that again, so that's still a great game.
Find that court poop.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. As for me, as I mentioned, going to be finishing up Resident Evil 2 hardcore run. I may or may not play more Resident Evil 2 after that. See how I feel. Do hardcore with Leon or go for speed runs or the other challenges in the game. I think the next game I'm going to play is probably Sunless Skies, or I'll dig into some backlog game. I'm not 100% sure yet. And also been fiddling with some battle royales like Apex Legends and Tetris 99, which putting those together is hilarious.
Yeah, that's good.
Yep. I think that's it for me, and I think that's it for this episode of ATACS. Thanks for listening. I've been Flex, joined by Will, Ryan, and Nate. This was ATACS episode 54, and we are signing off. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.